The frozen forests of the Ardennes stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944. Private James McCarthy pulled his wool coat tighter against the bitter Belgian wind, his breath forming crystalline clouds in the -20-degree air. Along the 85-mile front, American soldiers huddled in hastily dug foxholes. Believing they were holding the quietest sector of the Western Front, they were catastrophically wrong. Lieutenant Colonel Johann Piper adjusted his black Panzer. Uniformen surveyed the massive assembly hidden beneath the snow-laden pine trees. Behind him, 600 tanks and assault guns of the 6th Panzer Army waited like sleeping steel beasts. The greatest German offensive since 1940 was about to begin. And Hitler had personally selected Piper to spearhead the assault that would split the Allied armies and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. The plan, codenamed Operation Watch on the Rhine, represented Adolf Hitler's most desperate gamble. With Soviet forces advancing from the east and Allied armies pressing toward the German heartland, the Führer had concentrated his last strategic reserves for one final massive counteroffensive. 3 German armies, the 5th and 6th Panzer Armies, along with the 7th Army comprising over 200,000 men, had been secretly assembled in the dense Ardennes forests. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, had dismissed intelligence reports of German buildup as mere defensive preparations. The Ardennes, with its thick forests and narrow roads, seemed an unlikely avenue for major offensive operations. This miscalculation would soon cost thousands of American lives and nearly hand Hitler his most significant victory since the fall of France. Historical context referenced from Stephen Ambrose's Citizen Soldiers and official U.S. Army historical records. At exactly 5:30 in the morning, the winter silence erupted into hellish chaos. Over 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along the front, their shells screaming through the frigid air like banshees announcing doom. The concentrated barrage, the heaviest the Germans had unleashed since 1940, shattered the morning calm and announced Hitler's last great offensive in the West. Private McCarthy dove into his foxhole as 88mm shells exploded around him, sending geysers of frozen earth and splintered trees into the air. The young soldier from Ohio had joined the 106th Infantry Division just weeks earlier. One of thousands of replacement troops rushed to what commanders considered a quiet sector perfect for breaking in green units. The German assault began with textbook precision. Elite paratroopers of the 5th Parachute Division struck American positions while Panzer Grenadiers advanced through the snow-covered valleys. The surprise was complete. American forces spread thin across the extended front found themselves facing an enemy they hadn't expected to see in such overwhelming numbers. Colonel Hurley, Fuller of the 110th Infantry Regiment, watched in horror as German tanks emerged from the morning mist like mechanical phantoms. His regiment, holding positions near Clairvaux, Luxembourg, suddenly faced an entire armored division. The Americans fought with desperate courage, but they were outnumbered 10-1 as dawn broke fully over the Ardennes. The scope of the German offensive became terrifyingly clear. This was no limited attack or spoiling operation. This was Hitler's bid to turn the tide of the war itself. The German assault achieved complete tactical surprise across the Ardennes front. By noon on December 16th, Kampfgruppe Piper had smashed through American defensive positions and was racing westward toward the Meuse River bridges. The elite Waffen-SS unit, spearheading the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, advanced with ruthless efficiency through the Belgian countryside. Behind Piper's racing tanks, the full weight of the German offensive pressed forward. General Hasse von Mantefel's 5th Panzer Army struck the center of the American line, targeting the green troops of the 106th Infantry Division. These soldiers, many seeing combat for the first time, found themselves engulfed by a mechanized avalanche of Tiger tanks, Panther tanks, and motorized infantry. The town of Sankt Vith became a crucial crossroads in the developing battle. Major General Alan Jones, commanding the 106th Infantry Division, realized his scattered units were being systematically destroyed. Communications broke down as German forces severed telephone lines and overran command posts. In the confusion, entire American battalions found themselves cut off and surrounded. Private First Class Leo Gardner of the 422nd Infantry Regiment watched German tanks roll through his unit's positions near Schnee-Eifel. The ridge, which Americans had held for months, fell within hours to German assault troops. Gardner and hundreds of his comrades became prisoners as two entire regiments of the 106th Division were encircled and forced to surrender. Referenced from Charles MacDonald's A Time for Trumpets, an official Wehrmacht operational, reports the breakthrough created panic in Allied headquarters. General Courtney Hodges, commanding the First Army, initially refused to believe reports of a major German offensive. The intelligence failure was complete lie. Commanders had convinced themselves that Germany lacked the strength for significant operations. This miscalculation now threatened to tear a fatal gap in the Western Front. Kampfgruppe advanced with mechanical precision, but their rapid progress came at a terrible human cost. At Malmedy, Belgium, Piper's SS troops captured over 100 American soldiers from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. In a war crime that would echo through history, the German troops machine-gunned the unarmed prisoners in a snow-covered field. The Malmedy massacre became a rallying cry for American forces and hardened resolve throughout the Allied armies. General Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army pressed its advantage, exploiting the gaps created by the initial assault. German infantry, many veterans transferred from the Eastern Front, demonstrated the tactical expertise that had made the Wehrmacht legendary. They moved through the Ardennes forests with practiced efficiency, outflanking American positions and creating chaos behind enemy lines. The weather favored the German offensive. Heavy snow and thick clouds grounded Allied air power, neutralizing one of America's greatest tactical advantages. General Dwight Eisenhower's air forces, which had dominated European skies since D-Day, remained helpless on frozen airfields while German columns advanced unimpeded by evening of the first day. German forces had penetrated up to 12 miles into American positions. The offensive had achieved its initial objectives, creating a dangerous bulge in Allied lines that threatened to split British and American forces. Hitler's gamble appeared to be succeeding, and German morale soared as victory seemed within reach for the first time in months. The stage was set for one of the most desperate battles in American military history as German forces carved deeper into Allied lines. One Belgian town emerged as the critical pivot point of the entire offensive. Bastogne, a modest market town of 4,000 inhabitants, sat at the convergence of 7 major roads, leading in all directions through the Ardennes. Control of this transportation hub would determine whether German armored spearheads could maintain their momentum toward the Meuse River and beyond to Antwerp. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, deputy commander of the 101st Airborne Division, found himself rushed to Bastogne with orders to hold the town at all costs. The paratroopers, veterans of Normandy and Operation Market Garden, arrived just as German armored columns converged on the strategic crossroads. McAuliffe's force, numbering fewer than 11,000 men, faced elements of 3 German divisions totaling over 45,000 troops. The Siege of Bastogne began on December 20th when German forces completed their encirclement of the town. General Heinrich von Leutwitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps, deployed the 2nd Panzer Division, Panzer Lehr Division, and 26th Volksgrenadier Division in a tightening ring around the American defenders. The Germans possessed overwhelming superiority in tanks, artillery, and manpower. Staff Sergeant William Garner of Easy Company 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment established defensive positions in the frozen forests surrounding Bastogne. The Philadelphia native had fought through Sicily, Normandy, and Holland, but nothing had prepared him for the desperate nature of this siege. With ammunition running low and medical supplies exhausted, the paratroopers faced a fight for survival against impossible odds. Historical accounts drawn from interviews with veterans published in Stephen Ambrose's Band of Brothers and official Army historical records. The German assault on Bastogne intensified throughout December 21st and 22nd. Panzer Lehr Division launched coordinated attacks from the west, while the 26th Volksgrenadier Division pressed from the north and east. German artillery pounded American positions continuously, and Luftwaffe fighters strafed supply drops. Whenever weather permitted flight operations, inside the encircled perimeter, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Medical supplies ran critically short, forcing Army surgeons to operate without adequate anesthesia. Food became so scarce that soldiers subsisted on emergency care rations and whatever provisions they could scavenge from abandoned Belgian homes. The bitter cold, with temperatures dropping below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, created additional casualties from frostbite and exposure. On December 22nd, German negotiators approached American lines under a white flag. General von Luttwitz had composed a formal surrender ultimatum, demanding that McAuliffe capitulate to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. The German message warned of annihilation if the Americans refused to surrender within 2 hours. McAuliffe's response became legendary in military history. After consulting with his staff, the general dictated a single-word reply that captured the defiant spirit of his beleaguered command: nuts. Colonel Joseph Harper delivered the message to bewildered German officers, explaining that it meant the Americans refused to surrender under any circumstances. The siege continued with renewed ferocity. German forces launched night attacks against American positions, probing for weaknesses in the defensive perimeter. The paratroopers, supported by elements of the 10th Armored Division and scattered artillery units, held their ground through sheer determination and superior small unit tactics. As December 23rd dawned clear and cold, the weather finally broke in favor of the defenders. For the first time in a week, Allied aircraft could operate over the battlefield. C-47 transport planes began dropping desperately needed supplies, ammunition, and medical equipment to the encircled garrison. The stage was set for the climactic phase of the Battle of the Bulge. General George Smith Patton Jr. paced the floor of his 3rd Army headquarters in Nancy, France, studying maps of the Ardennes sector with characteristic intensity. The flamboyant commander, known throughout the Allied armies for his aggressive tactics and colorful personality, had received urgent orders from Supreme Allied Command to disengage his forces from their offensive in the Saar region and pivot 90 degrees north to relieve the besieged garrison at Bastogne. The maneuver Patton was about to execute ranks among the most remarkable achievements in military logistics, moving an entire army consisting of over 250,000 men, thousands of vehicles, and countless tons of equipment across frozen roads in the middle of winter while maintaining combat. Effectiveness seemed virtually impossible. Most military experts estimated such a redeployment would require weeks to accomplish. Patton completed it in 72 hours. On December 19th, elements of the 3rd Army's 4th Armored Division began their rapid march north toward Luxembourg. Combat Command A, led by Colonel Creighton Abrams, spearheaded the advance with Sherman tanks and mechanized infantry. The relief column faced not only German resistance but also treacherous winter conditions that turned roads into ice-covered death traps for vehicles and men alike. Details referenced from Martin Blumensen's Patton, the man behind the legend and 3rd Army after-action reports. Meanwhile, German forces continued their maximum effort to capture Bastogne before American reinforcements could arrive. The Panzer Lehr Division launched desperate attacks against the northwestern perimeter, while the 26th Volksgrenadier Division pressed from multiple directions. German commanders recognized that failure to take this crucial road junction would doom their entire offensive to strategic failure. First Lieutenant John Chester of the 3rd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, coordinated defensive fires against repeated German assaults. The young officer from Vermont had lost half his company during the first week of fighting, but his remaining paratroopers continued to hold their sector through a combination of courage, tactical skill, and sheer stubborn determination. The weather remained the wild card in the developing battle. Clear skies on December 23rd allowed massive Allied airstrikes against German positions. 9th Air Force fighter bombers operating from bases in France and Belgium launched over 1,100 sorties against German armor and supply columns. The Luftwaffe, despite concentrating its remaining strength for the offensive, proved unable to challenge Allied air superiority effectively. On Christmas Eve, Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division made contact with German forces defending the southern approaches to Bastogne. Colonel Abrams deployed his Sherman tanks in a coordinated assault against positions held by the 5th Parachute Division. The fighting was savage and close range, with American and German armor engaging at distances measured in hundreds of yards. Rather than miles, the breakthrough came at 4:50 in the afternoon on December 26th. Lieutenant Charles Bogus of the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, led his Sherman tank through German defensive positions and made physical contact with paratroopers of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion. The siege of Bastogne was broken after 6 days of desperate fighting. General McAuliffe emerged from his command bunker to greet the relief column personally. The airborne commander, whose defiant nuts response had become a symbol of American determination, congratulated Patton's tankers on their remarkable achievement. The successful relief of Bastogne marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's last great offensive in the West. However, the Battle of the Bulge was far from over. German forces still occupied a dangerous salient 50 miles deep and 60 miles wide in Allied lines. The task of eliminating this bulge and restoring the front would require weeks of additional fighting in the worst winter weather conditions in decades. The successful relief of Bastogne marked a crucial turning point, but German forces still controlled a massive salient that threatened Allied strategic objectives. Field Marshal Walther Model, commanding Army Group B, recognized that his offensive had lost its momentum, but ordered his forces to consolidate their gains and prepare defensive positions, refusing to acknowledge the failure of his grand strategy demanded that German troops hold every yard of captured territory. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, coordinated the Allied counteroffensive with methodical precision. The plan called for a coordinated pincer movement designed to cut off and destroy German forces trapped in the Ardennes salient. The First Army would attack from the north while Patton's Third Army pressed from the south, gradually compressing German forces into an ever-shrinking pocket. The weather continued to play a decisive role in the battle's development. January 1945 brought the harshest winter conditions in 50 years to the Ardennes region. Temperatures dropped to -20-5 degrees Fahrenheit, creating additional casualties from frostbite and exposure on both sides. Snowdrifts reached depths of 4 feet, making movement difficult for infantry and nearly impossible for vehicles. Major General J. Lawton Collins, commanding the 7th Corps, launched the northern arm of the Allied pincer on January 3rd. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions spearheaded the assault. Supported by infantry from the 83rd and 84th Divisions, progress was slow and costly as German forces had used the previous weeks to construct formidable defensive positions in the frozen forests. Tactical details drawn from Russell Weigley's Eisenhower's Lieutenants in official U.S. Army Center of Military History publications, Camp Front Piper. The spearhead of the original German offensive found itself increasingly isolated as Allied forces compressed the salient from multiple directions. The elite SS unit, which had advanced farther west than any other German formation, was forced to abandon its vehicles and attempt to escape on foot through the snow-covered forests. Lieutenant Colonel Piper's tankers, who had come within sight of the Meuse River bridges, now struggled simply to survive as American forces closed in from all directions. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte, Adolf Hitler, once Hitler's premier armored formation, suffered devastating losses during the retreat. Tank after tank was abandoned when fuel supplies ran out or mechanical problems made repair impossible under combat conditions. The proud unit that had spearheaded German victories from Poland to the gates of Moscow was reduced to scattered groups of infantry fleeing through the Belgian wilderness. American forces pressed their advantage with relentless determination. The 4th Armored Division, fresh from their success at Bastogne, drove north toward Houffalize, while elements of the 1st Army pushed south from the opposite direction. The two Allied spearheads aimed to meet in the center of the German salient, trapping thousands of enemy troops in a classic double envelopment technical. Sergeant Vernon Baker of the 370th Infantry Regiment led his squad through the ruins of St. Vith, a Belgian town that had changed hands multiple times during the battle. The veteran non-commissioned officer observed the devastating impact of modern, Warfare on civilian populations caught in the combat zone. Entire villages lay in ruins, their inhabitants fled or killed during weeks of artillery bombardments and house-to-house fighting. German resistance remained fierce despite the hopeless strategic situation. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, and 9th SS Panzer Division, Hohenstaufen, fought desperate rearguard actions to keep escape routes open for retreating comrades. These veteran formations, composed largely of Eastern Front survivors, demonstrated the tactical expertise and fanatical determination that had made the Waffen-SS legendary throughout the war. By January 16th, Allied forces had compressed the German salient to a fraction of its original size. The meeting of American spearheads at Hephelus symbolically closed the Bulge and restored the original front lines. Hitler's last great offensive in the West had ended in complete failure, costing Germany irreplaceable reserves of men and equipment that could never be replaced. The elimination of the Ardennes salient on January 28, 1945, marked the official end of the Battle of the Bulge. But the human cost of Hitler's final gamble was staggering. American casualties exceeded 9,000 men, including 19,000 killed in action, making it the bloodiest single battle in United States Army history. The psychological impact on surviving soldiers would last far beyond the war's end. Private Robert Hendricks of the 28th Infantry Division sat in a field hospital near Liège, Belgium, staring at the bandages covering his frostbitten feet. The farm boy from Iowa had survived 6 weeks of combat in the Ardennes forests, but like thousands of his comrades, bore physical and emotional scars that would never fully heal. The brutal winter fighting had tested American soldiers beyond any previous experience in the European theater. German losses proved even more catastrophic for Hitler's war effort. Over 100,000 Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS troops became casualties during the offensive, including irreplaceable veterans from elite panzer and parachute divisions. More significantly, the Germans lost over 800 tanks and assault guns, along with countless trucks, artillery pieces, and other equipment that German industry could no longer replace. General Dwight Eisenhower surveyed the devastation. During a inspection tour of the former battlefield, the Supreme Allied Commander observed burned-out villages, destroyed bridges, and forests stripped bare by artillery bombardments. The civilian population of the Ardennes had paid a terrible price for Hitler's desperation. With thousands of Belgian and Luxembourg citizens killed or left homeless during the winter fighting, casualty figures and strategic analysis referenced from official U.S. Army historical studies in Charles McDonnell's definitive The Battle of the Bulge. The strategic implications of German defeat in the Ardennes extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Hitler had committed his last mobile reserves to the offensive, gambling everything on one final throw of the dice. The failure of Operation Watch on the Rhine left Germany defenseless against the massive Soviet winter offensive that began on January 12 along the entire Eastern Front. Field Marshal Walther Model, the defensive expert who had commanded Army Group B during the battle, recognized that Germany's military situation had become hopeless. The armies under his command had been shattered by 6 weeks of continuous combat, against overwhelming Allied superiority in men, equipment, and air power. The defensive positions along the Siegfried Line, Germany's last barrier against Allied invasion, lay weakly manned by exhausted troops. The psychological impact on German morale proved as devastating as the material losses. Soldiers who had believed in Hitler's promise of secret weapons and miraculous victory now faced the reality of inevitable defeat. The myth of Wehrmacht invincibility, already tarnished by defeats in Russia and Normandy, collapsed completely in the frozen forests of the Ardennes. American forces emerged from the battle with enhanced confidence and tactical expertise. Units that had broken under the initial German assault reformed and fought with skill and determination. The citizen soldiers of democracy had proven they could match the combat effectiveness of Hitler's elite formations when properly led and equipped. Colonel Creighton Abrams, whose 4th Armored Division spearheaded the relief of Bastogne, summarized the battle's significance in a letter to his wife. "We learned that Americans can fight as hard as any soldiers in the world when the cause is just and the leadership is sound. Hitler threw his best at us, and we threw it back in his face." The Battle of the Bulge had tested American resolve to its limits and found it unbreakable. The path to Berlin now lay open, defended only by the remnants of Hitler's once mighty war machine. The Battle of the Bulge concluded with profound implications that extended far beyond the immediate military situation. Hitler's failed offensive had accomplished exactly the opposite of its intended strategic goals. Instead of splitting the Western Allies and forcing a separate peace, the desperate gamble had accelerated Germany's collapse and strengthened Allied resolve to achieve unconditional surrender. General Dwight Eisenhower's leadership during the crisis demonstrated the value of coalition warfare based on mutual trust and shared objectives. When German forces threatened to split British and American armies, Eisenhower made the controversial decision to place American units under British command north of the penetration. This decision, though politically sensitive, proved militarily sound and maintained Allied unity during the most dangerous moment of the Western European campaign field. Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding the 21st Army Group, coordinated the northern shoulder of Allied defenses with characteristic precision. British forces, including the 30th Corps and Guards Armored Division, played crucial roles in containing German advances and preventing the offensive from reaching the Meuse River crossings. The seamless cooperation between British and American forces validated Eisenhower's integrated command structure. Strategic analysis drawn from Forrest Pogue's official history, the Supreme Command, and Eisenhower's personal war memoirs. The human stories emerging from the Ardennes fighting became legendary in American military tradition. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division, who had held Bastogne against impossible odds, became symbols of American determination and courage. Their defiant stand, epitomized by General McAuliffe's famous "Nuts" response, inspired a generation of soldiers and civilians alike. Technical Sergeant Jake Mickness of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment survived the siege of Bastogne to fight in subsequent campaigns through Germany. The career soldier from Oklahoma recognized that the battle had fundamentally changed the character of American forces. Units that had cracked under initial German assault returned to combat with enhanced tactical skills and unshakable confidence in their abilities. The technological lessons learned in the BRD influenced military doctrine for decades after the war's end. American forces discovered that superior firepower and logistics could overcome tactical surprise and initial disadvantage when applied with determination and skill. The integration of close air support, artillery coordination, and armored mobility demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms warfare under competent leadership. German tactical performance during the offensive revealed both the strengths and limitations of Wehrmacht doctrine. Elite formations like the 1st SS Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr Division demonstrated exceptional tactical expertise during the initial breakthrough phase. However, their inability to exploit early success highlighted fundamental flaws in German strategic planning and resource allocation. The civilian population of Belgium and Luxembourg paid an enormous price for Hitler's final Western offensive. Thousands of innocent people were killed or wounded during the fighting, while entire communities were destroyed by artillery bombardments and house-to-house combat. The reconstruction of the Ardennes region required years of international assistance and cooperation. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allied forces. The path to that final victory had led directly through the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes, where American soldiers had proven their mettle against Hitler's best remaining troops. The Battle of the Bulge stands as testament to the courage and determination of citizen soldiers fighting for freedom against totalitarian aggression. Veterans of the Ardennes campaign carried their experiences forward into peacetime, helping build the democratic institutions that would define the post-war world. Their sacrifice and courage in the winter of 1944 and 45 ensured that Hitler's last gamble failed completely, hastening the end of the most destructive conflict in human history. The frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg, once witness to desperate combat and heroic sacrifice, returned to peaceful silence. But the memory of what occurred there during those crucial weeks remains forever embedded in the history of human freedom.